Edward Harrow had spent his life constructing empires of glass and steel, yet nothing captivated him as much as the woman seated across the table that night. Isabella. Her name alone carried an elegance that felt almost dangerous. The restaurant. Lights shimmered against crystal glasses, but her face, half drowned in candlelight, half hidden in shadow, commanded his attention with an intensity no deal, no fortune, ever had. He raised his glass, watching the fractured reflection of himself in the wine. For a fleeting second, the distortion unsettled him, but Isabella's smile drew him back, soft and deliberate, like a secret whispered in the dark. "You look as though you're staring at more than the wine," she teased, her voice low, velvet. With something unplaceable, Edward leaned closer. "I'm staring at the future." Her laughter was quiet but sharp, like crystal shattering in his ear. She didn't look away. Instead, her eyes, green yet strangely unreadable, studied him, with a stillness that felt like assessment rather than affection. But Edward, intoxicated by her beauty and the illusion of perfection, mistook her silence for mystery. Their nights blurred into a parade of champagne, theater balconies, and midnight drives along deserted roads. Edward poured wealth into gestures, jewels, gowns, promises of a life only novels dared describe. Isabella accepted everything with grace but never awe, as if she had expected it all, as if she belonged to this life long before him. Once, after a gala, when the city still glittered behind their limousine, Edward confessed, "I've built so much, but none of it mattered until you." Isabella tilted her head, a faint smile curving her lips. "Careful, Edward. Dreams can turn quickly, sometimes into something else entirely." He laughed it off, unaware of the warning cloaked in her words. He only saw perfection, a dream. Wife sculpted for a man who had everything except love. What he didn't see, what he couldn't, was the shadow beneath her smile, the shadow that would one day unravel his world. And in that moment, blinded by love, Edward unknowingly set the stage for his worst nightmare. The glow of perfection began to dim only weeks into their marriage. Edward had expected silence in the house to feel peaceful, like a cathedral of luxury. Instead, it grew oppressive, filled with strange absences, faint echoes, and the low hum of secrets. At first it was small. Doors locked from the inside when there was no reason. Drawers closed hurriedly when he entered a room. Isabella's laughter drifting faintly from the hallway, but always into a phone Edward never saw. One night, he rose from bed to find her, standing in the darkened corridor, her face illuminated only by the cold glow of her screen. Her voice was hushed, urgent, words slipping between pauses as though she were being instructed. He lingered by the bedroom door, the shadows swallowing him whole. "Isabella?" His voice broke the silence. She turned, startled, then quickly smiled. "Just my cousin in Florence. Time difference, you know." Edward nodded, though unease prickled his skin. The smile did not reach her eyes, and when she passed him he caught the faint scent of cigarette smoke clinging to her gown. Though Isabella never smoked, by day she was flawless, radiant in silk and diamonds. By night, she vanished into pockets of secrecy. Yet Edward's desire for her smothered his suspicions. He told himself he was imagining things, that love demanded trust, that beauty as rare as hers came with mysteries one ought not disturb. Still, as he lay in bed, watching her silhouette in the faint light, a question gnawed at him. Who was she whispering to in the dark? The answer would not remain hidden for long, and when it surfaced, it would shatter far more than trust. The unease would not leave him. Nights of hushed phone calls and half-answers gnawed at Edward until curiosity finally overpowered restraint. One evening, while Isabella dressed for a charity banquet, he drifted into her private dressing room. The scent of her perfume lingered. The air, sweet, intoxicating, almost suffocating. A drawer left slightly ajar betrayed her. Inside lay a bundle of letters bound by a crimson ribbon, edges worn with age. His hands trembled as he unfolded one beneath the dim lamplight. My dearest, Isabella, the world may believe you belong to him, but you will always be mine. The words clawed at him. Beneath the letters, he found photographs. Isabella in the arms of another man, their faces pressed close, a passion unfiltered and raw. One photograph had been half burnt, her smile still visible, her lover's face charred away. The sound of heels clicked behind him. Edward! Isabella's voice sliced through the air. He froze, the photograph shaking in his grip. What is this? His voice cracked, torn between rage and disbelief. She glanced at the evidence and then at him, her expression unreadable. Slowly she smiled. Old ghosts, darling. You've made a story of ashes and scraps. Do you truly think I would marry you while belonging to another? Edward faltered. Her calmness unnerved him, her eyes cool as water over stone. But the letters, do you hear yourself? She whispered, stepping closer. You're letting shadows poison your mind. Is that what you want? To ruin us with fantasies? His anger wavered, replaced by doubt. Perhaps he had misread. Perhaps he was chasing phantoms. But the letters remained, silent witnesses, and Edward knew something inside her smile was devouring him alive. The letters haunted Edward, though Isabella's dismissal still echoed in his mind. He told himself to forget, but silence became their new language, an oppressive quiet that lingered even in the mansion's grandest rooms. What once was passion turned into subtle wars. Isabella's eyes no longer glowed with warmth. They cut through him with a cold defiance. Every gesture she made seemed deliberate, as if to remind him she was untouchable. One evening, a quarrel shattered the fragile peace. Edward stood at the bottom of the sweeping staircase, voice raw with frustration. You think you can lock me out of every truth and expect me to smile? From above, Isabella looked down like a queen surveying a servant. You mistake obsession for love, Edward. You don't want a wife, you want possession. The words pierced him. Rage welled in his chest, but before he could reply, her glass slipped from her hand. It shattered against the marble below, red wine spilling outward like fresh blood. Neither flinched. In the days that followed, Isabella tightened her hold in ways subtle yet merciless. Bank accounts shifted under her influence. Servants who once answered only to Edward now deferred to her commands. His fortune, his fortress, was no longer his alone. He watched as his empire bent around her, as though she were the architect, not him. The more he tried to reclaim control, the more she silenced him with calm stares and cutting words that made him question his sanity. And in that silence, Edward began to wonder, who truly owned whom? The mansion no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage. Edward sensed movements where there should have been stillness, eyes where there should have been none. At first he dismissed it as the paranoia Isabella had planted in him. But then, he saw him. A man lingered at the end of their drive, half consumed by the shadows of the street lamp. The faint glow of a cigarette flared, then faded, as though it were a signal meant only for her. Edward froze by the window, pulse hammering. The figure never moved closer, never turned away, just stood, waiting. That night Isabella slipped from their bed, thinking him asleep. Edward followed at a distance, the house silent beneath his feet. Through the crack of the garden doors, he saw her, Isabella cloaked in a silk robe, speaking to someone hidden beyond the hedge. A man's voice murmured low, urgent, and she leaned in, too close for a wife who had promised devotion. When she returned, Edward confronted her. Who was that? His voice was tight, controlled rage trembling beneath it. She didn't flinch. A neighbor, seeking directions, nothing more. But her lie was too clean, too rehearsed. The following evenings brought the same shadow outside, always under the same lamp, always smoking. Once Edward dared to step out, but the figure slipped into the dark as if he belonged there. The question devoured him. Was this man a stranger, or someone from Isabella's hidden past? And worse, if he had returned, what else was about to follow? Edward could no longer bear the silence. The shadow outside, the whispers in the garden, it was all leading somewhere. He tore through Isabella's private drawers again, this time uncovering what she had tried to bury. Debt ledgers, forged signatures, photographs with men whose faces were scratched away. A trail of betrayal, stretching back years. When she entered the study and saw the papers scattered across the desk, her mask cracked. "You've lied to me," Edward said, voice raw, trembling with both fury and disbelief. Isabella's expression twisted, rage flaring. "Lied. Don't be naive, Edward. You were never chosen for love, you were chosen for your fortune." The words struck like a blade. His chest tightened, but she wasn't finished. "You think you're special? You're not the first man to fall for me, to build me a palace only for me to burn it down. You're just next." Edward's legs nearly gave way as the room seemed to close in. She had done this before. Played wife, carved wealth, left ruin. He wasn't her victim by chance. He was her pattern, and suddenly the stranger in the shadows was no longer a mystery. He was proof. Edward thought he had reached the depth of her deceit, but the abyss was only beginning. The morning his solicitor rang, his world cracked open. Accounts drained, properties transferred, investments siphoned through offshore shadows. Isabella had moved faster than he could have imagined, using his own wealth as the weapon. The scandal followed swiftly. Anonymous reports of fraud tied to his name, whispers of corruption staining his reputation. At board meetings, once loyal, directors now eyed him with doubt. He was no longer the empire builder. He was the man undone by his wife. That evening, Edward confronted Isabella in the drawing room. Flames from the fireplace licked at the papers he had cast in, bank statements, curling into ash. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice hollow. She watched the fire as if it were art. "No, Edward. I've freed you from the illusion that you were ever in control." Her calmness was unbearable. He turned to the mirror above the mantel and caught his own reflection, fractured by a crack across the glass. Fury stared back at him, eyes no longer softened by love. The marriage had become a battlefield, lies woven into vows, silence sharper than knives. Yet as the fire consumed the last of his fortune's proof, Edward felt something shift within. Him. For the first time, he did not see himself as the victim. He saw the hunter awakening, and Isabella, for all her cunning, had no idea that her final game was about to turn against her. The storm battered the windows as if the sky itself wanted to break the mansion apart. Edward stood in the dim-lit hall, the crackling fire casting long shadows. Across from him, Isabella descended the staircase with the elegance of a predator. "You've already lost," she said, her voice calm, venom laced in silk. "Your fortune is gone, your reputation in ruins. One word from me, and what little remains of you will be ashes." Edward did not flinch. His eyes, once clouded by desire, now burned with something colder. "You've played this game before, Isabella, but games end." She laughed, sharp and cruel, yet beneath it lingered a flicker of unease. For the first time she realized Edward was no longer hers to control. The confrontation exploded, shouts reverberating against the storm, truths flung like knives. Isabella's threats grew desperate, promising his destruction, but Edward had already laid his countermove. Evidence of her past victims, her fraud, her betrayals. He had unearthed it all. When the storm finally quieted, only Edward remained. The mansion was wreckage, the silence absolute. He stood alone by the shattered window, rain lashing in, the weight of survival pressing on his shoulders. His dream wife was gone. His nightmare had only just begun.